Well, we are still at the infant stage of the college basketball season, but we've had some upsets and we've had some shakeups already. Who's hot, who's been tested, and more today, right here on Locked On Women's Basketball.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends. It is Monday, November 18th, 2024. We are halfway through this month of November, which seems to be one of the busiest times in college sports and in sports in general, and who absolutely cannot love it. I am Missy Heidrick, national correspondent at The Next and Analyst. Thank you so much for joining us today. Your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. Introducing the Locked On NBA Daily Newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On NBA Newsletter. You can start this season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. And if you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, we waited, some of us more impatiently than others, and the college basketball season tipped off 2 weeks ago today. We've had some movement in the first round of the polls, some upsets, some games that have made you stop and pay attention. And today we need to break down what's happening in that top 25, what's happening early all across the country, who's made some news, and dip our toe into what's going on at the West Coast as well, and what lies ahead for everybody, few and far in between. Here to help me with all of it is on this fabulous Monday. It's raining where I am. Not sure what's happening out on the West Coast this morning, but it's a sports editor at SF Gate and AP Women's Basketball voter, Alex Simon. Alex, good morning, my friend. Is it raining where you are? Because it's raining cats and dogs in Kansas City right now.
It is bright and sunny this morning. It is a little chilly, and the rain is coming. That I can say for sure. We are going to get rain this week, so it's kind of you're anticipating the dreary, but
there you go.
No sunshine.
See, and I feel like this, and for those of us in Kansas City, the Chiefs lose, so it rains on a Monday. The 49ers lose, the sun comes out. I don't know where that really all plays into the universe, but I guess we just have to go with it, right?
It was not a dreary day. It was a dreary day during the game yesterday over here. So, yeah, I think this is the change everybody needed, clearly. So
absolutely. All right. Well, let's hit it where I think everybody has started. That, as we know, preseason polls are fabulous because it's just everything on paper and everyone looks like a genius because we think we have it all figured out until they actually start playing games across the country in women's college basketball. So give me your take right out of the gate. We'll break down certain teams. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening with some individual matchups. But as you've looked at the overarching first 2 weeks of the season, what stands out to you?
Well, South Carolina might be pretty good again. I mean, it's hard. Let's just start with the basics, right? Yeah. There is clearly, I think, and this is a thing that I take at really thought as an AP poll voter. We don't necessarily know what these teams are like and what they're going to be, probably even for weeks and months. And these teams change over the course of the season. We're all making educated guesses. Sorry to take everybody behind the curtain there. But I think in part, we're doing it off of reputation. And I, as an AP poll voter, like to give teams the benefit of the doubt if they have gone out and challenged themselves. There are plenty of teams who right now have great records and have started the season undefeated and even tallied up a lot of wins in the first 2 weeks, but are doing it against kind of middling to lower level competition that I would prefer to see teams do what South Carolina has done. I believe so far this season, they have already played both NC State and Michigan. They have UCLA coming up this upcoming weekend. And if you win those games, one, it gives you a better eval quickly on a team. But you see how teams are starting to evolve over the course of the season against like for like. For South Carolina to start out, it wasn't the best game against Michigan, I think the Gamecocks would happily say. But we've seen them start to evolve. We know that they have a stronger schedule. And this is clearly, and I think maybe with one exception, clearly the most talented team in the country from the top of the roster to the bottom.
No, I would absolutely agree with you. And I always go with the old adage that if you want to be the best, you've got to beat the best. That team goes 38-0 a year ago. And until somebody can knock them off, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that they're not the best team in the country. Now, you lose Camila Cardoso in the middle, but I feel like sometimes now it gives South Carolina a chance to maybe play differently. You can play bigger, you can play smaller, you can play faster. If they want to play more in the half court, they've been able to do that. And you've seen it just through these first few games. It's not by any means, it's a work in progress. This is not at all the peak of what you're seeing. But I think it goes back to Dawn Staley understanding her personnel and putting them in a position here early where they are challenged and yet still having success.
Yeah, and I mean, without getting too much into it, like the Ashlyn Watkins situation undoubtedly plays a role in that as well, that the roster is probably even different than they expected it to be. So within that, they look really solid. All of the teams that I think we expected, I mean, none of them have taken a surprise loss yet out of any of the teams that I think we knew were the top, let's even just say 6, 7, 8 in that regard. Right. You know, it's at that next tier where those teams went and kind of challenged themselves, one, against South Carolina, like NC State did, or North Carolina took on Yukon and hosted them down in Greensboro. They lost the game, but I thought there was some interesting developments out of that. But that's the tier where I think once you get past, I would say even Iowa State, who I saw out here in the NCAA tournament and thought they could be really good this year, and so far I've looked at, but that's 6, 7, 8 teams where once you get beneath them, it's kind of an open guess for me from 9 all the way through to even like 45 to know who's as talented as this team. What are they doing here? And these early games where they go head to head, I think prove to be really pivotal. And we've had some very interesting early games so far, Missy.
Yeah, no, I think we have. And you mentioned Iowa State. Their next 4 games are Northern Iowa and Drake. Then they take on South Carolina. Then it's Middle Tennessee. Now, the UNI and the Drake, I want to remind everybody that there was an agreement made within the state of Iowa, within their women's basketball programs, that Drake, Iowa State, UNI, and the University of Iowa, they all play each other in a home alternate setup. So those are baked into their schedule every year. You're talking about Drake, who's picked to win the Missouri Valley, UNI, who has been one of the top teams in that league as well. So I think Iowa State is ramping up. And in the conversations that Bill Finley looked, I think he talked in the preseason, was that he knew this was going to be a challenging schedule for this Cyclone team. The gift that keeps on giving is you have a player like Emily Ryan that comes back. And I think that right there might be the X factor for them, that leadership at the guard position. Not everybody has that right now across the country.
And I mean, even the teams that we think do have it, right? I think Iowa State's only played 4 games. So like, we're just early. We will find out more about all of these teams here very soon. When we talk about the West Coast later, we're going to talk about some very massive matchups that are going to help let us learn a lot about all of these teams.
No, you are absolutely right. You mentioned Yukon, the challenge. They went to Greensboro, played North Carolina. Gino ties the all-time wins record, ties Tar Vanderveer. He will break that record here coming up. As a voter, I guess, give me your take on Yukon, just in the sense that there's always that question mark and the asterisk because they haven't really been, we're not 100% there. So how do you balance that and then think about the competition, the teams that they are going up against?
Well, I mean, North Carolina and South Florida are both teams that are at times perennial tournament teams here. So it's not like even within their schedule, they haven't gone after this and gone aggressively. Look, the month of December for them in non-conference play, they play Louisville, Notre Dame, Iowa State, and USC. Like we are early in the season. Everything about what we think about them is still there, and nothing has proven wrong. Sarah Strong looks unbelievable for a freshman early. Paige Beckers looks like somebody who could probably be doing well in the WNBA right now, but is still in college. So everything about Yukon is exactly what we expected them to be. And it's kind of just like a wait and see. The North Carolina win is a good win. They are a good team, but there will be more challenges for this Yukon team to come because, oh, by the way, they play South Carolina in February too.
Yeah. That we throw that one in the midst of all of the craziness that is conference schedules, right? There's no doubt. Okay. When we come back, we've got to stay with us because we're going to talk with Alex about what this AP poll looks like. We said everything kind of sits maybe 8, 9 and up kind of has been the baked in, but I think the movement and the craziness is everything underneath that. We'll talk about it in just a moment. Well, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. This month is all about gratitude. It is November and it's the month of Thanksgiving. And all along with a person, I just want you to know that we can always give thanks to everybody else, but you can give thanks to yourself. Sometimes it's hard to remind ourselves that we're trying our best to make sense of everything in this crazy world that it is. And that isn't easy. So it's a reminder to give some thanks to the people that are in your life, including yourself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited for your schedule. Just fill out the brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. Switch therapists for any time at no additional charge. So let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Hi, everybody. Missy Heidrick. Welcome back to Locked On Women's Basketball. Thank you for making us your first listen here today. Alex Simon joined me from the West Coast, and we talked early, Alex, here in this episode about sort of the top section. Who's to beat. You sit at number 1 if you're South Carolina, so somebody's going to be able to knock you off. They're going to see a lot of ranked teams over the course of the next few weeks, and there's a lot of them on this list. One that is intriguing for me is Oklahoma. And I asked you about the Sooners because I've always been a big Jenny Branchick fan. I think what she's done at OU, very quietly, sometimes under the radar. They win Big 12 championships. They, kind of the last hurrah, and then they waved goodbye and went to the SEC. But she had close to over 95% of her scoring and rebounding back from a year ago. And then she lands Reagan Beers in from the portal into their system. They sit at 3-0 right now. And I don't know if there's a lot of folks necessarily in the SEC that are really talking about Oklahoma, but I feel like they're going to bounce up and bite some people. And this is a pretty darn good Sooner squad. Yeah.
And again, it's tough just because you just don't know what went into how a team makes a schedule. But when Oklahoma so far, it's hard to really evaluate them. But when you get the schedule you have to take care of your business. And boy, have they done that. Putting up 122 on anybody in college basketball is nothing to sneeze at. You're averaging more than 3 points a minute in that regard. I don't necessarily know if Western Carolina is the strongest competition. But here's the other thing that I really start to appreciate about programs is, are you actually challenging yourselves in what is mostly a true road game schedule? Because that's going to matter come conference play. This week upcoming, Oklahoma, they played them on Tuesday at Wichita State. They have a pure road game on Friday at UNLV, who's been a Mountain West power for the last couple of years. They are going to absolutely put themselves in positions to have some different environments and get ready. They also will have Louisville coming up in the ACC, SEC next month. They'll play Michigan at some point before you even get into the really strong SEC play. Everything about this team, and especially adding what they've done in the transfer portal. I mean, to be able to add Reagan Beers from the unfortunate, situation out of Oregon State, right, really makes what already was going to be a pretty solid team, a much deeper team. And I think this is absolutely a team to me that feels like almost, I don't want to say anything that, seems silly if injuries happen or whatnot, but if this team stays healthy, automatic Sweet 16 team and some damage can be done from there. Absolutely feels possible. Yeah, they've got a system. It's hard to guard, and defense has not always been their forte, but they're going to put points on the board. But I think having a player like Beers in the paint helps them defensively, gives them more size. They haven't had that necessarily the last couple of years. And I think it can change how they can play and maybe even be more aggressive defensively than they have in the past. A team that has prided themselves on their defense. I saw them in person yesterday in Brookings, South Dakota. They escape South Dakota State with a 4-point win, 75-71, the Duke Blue Devils. And they had a week ago last Sunday lost at Maryland. And I don't think Kara Lawson she didn't come out of that very happy, it seems like, and understandably so. I think they left a lot of points out on the floor. They made some mistakes defensively
They rectified that against State, and then they were challenged yesterday, no doubt, at South Dakota State, a fantastic women's basketball environment. Your take on Duke and Maryland, who has kind of moved themselves up into this picture. I think a team a lot of people had questions about.
Yeah, I mean, look, Brenda Frese is Brenda Frese, and she, even if the roster turns over at different points, she will always challenge that team in the non-conference play. She's perennially played South Carolina in those runs. She obviously scheduled Duke. She went to Syracuse this past week and won again. So that's 2 wins over ACC schools. But Duke is in the same way. Look, again, I tend to, as an AP poll voter, give credit to teams who try to make early challenges to themselves based off of what we know. Things are going to change over the course of the season. But Duke deciding to go at Maryland, at South Dakota State. This week they have Belmont, who's been a usual heavy hitter in the mid-majors. They have Kansas State coming in. They'll host Columbia, who made the tournament last year out of the Ivy League. Oh, yeah, they play at South Carolina in the SEC, ACC crossover thing later in the non-con season. Everything about this Duke team screams like a team that wants to challenge itself to figure itself out quickly, to pull out a tough road win in an environment. I mean, I know over at the Next, Emily Adler wrote an entire story about how teams are really dumb if you decide to go to South Dakota State. That's a place where Power 5 teams go to die, basically.
No one wants to go there. And you can see why.
For them to do it and pull out the win, and you saw why. Look, I had South Dakota State ranked after the upset win that they pulled off last week against Creighton. They have been really one of the premier mid-major teams. They got a win against Wisconsin, and by the way, they are blowing out some of these teams like Wisconsin. They beat by 22 at home. They have Georgia Tech, Oregon coming in. They'll have more shots to earn their way right back into my personal top 25, but they look like a team that's going to be not just a tournament team, but probably a team to be ready for your upset brackets if they're 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 seed, wherever they end up. So everything about these matchups kind of confirms your preconceived notions. And as you get through the course of the season, we'll obviously see teams and change. But so far, Duke looks like a team that absolutely is in we are one of the best 25 teams in the country. And I actually have them pretty high right now because of the way they're challenging themselves on their schedule.
Yeah, and I think the way they did it yesterday, they got up 10. South Dakota State came back on them. They were able to sustain a lead late. It went back and forth, and it was a bit of a grind out. They've been averaging 84 points a game. They only scored 75 yesterday, and everybody's, other than Maryland, everyone scored less than 60 on them. So 71 by South Dakota State, not a surprise to me. For an incredibly healthy Jackrabbit team, I think you're right. They're going to continue, and you will see them in the polls, I think, throughout the course of the season. There was one big, I don't know if we want to call it major upset. I felt like it was one you have to circle. And that is TCU taking down NC State yesterday. Sedona Prince, 31 points, 16 boards. Haley Van Lith with a double-double. They were up big. They hang on. They get the win. TCU has been right there in that voting, in the receiving votes portion of the poll. Where do the Horned Frogs land when this thing is unveiled here?
I mean, they're a perfect example of how do you figure out a team that's added all of these transfers and is truly like, maybe their talent is really good, but to some extent you have to see it on the court before. This is a team that I thought could be really good last year when they added all the transfers in, and then they just got so decimated by injuries. I mean, remember, Missy, they were adding kids off of, trying to turn over stones on campus in any nook and cranny they had. They even had to forfeit 2 games because of all the injuries. So, to that extent, if this is a TCU team that's built something a little more sustainable, I'm cautious at the idea that Sedona Prince played every single second of that game yesterday, given the injury history there. But if you're putting up 31 and 16, it's hard not to do that. They have quickly jumped into not just my top 25. I had them at 20th in the poll that I submitted. I don't want to discredit NC State too much because they've gone and played South Carolina. They took this true road game to TCU for a team that, clearly I think we're all going to look back and say this team's pretty good. But it's certainly everything about what TCU looks like and other teams as well. Kentucky has completely changed over via the transfer portal, got a big win against Louisville. They've jumped very quickly up in my AP poll after that. That adds a little bit of chaos for us dear poll voters. So please, don't scream and yell at us after the first few weeks. If you want to scream and yell at me, save it for January. I'll take it then and be happy to wear it. But we're all kind of figuring things out as we go here at the start of the year. And that, I think, includes the teams themselves.
No, I think you're right. And you talk to any coach and they'll tell you all of the things. We're still learning. We're still growing. We're still trying. I mean, you can watch any game right now and see a mixture of lineups. It's not the same five that starts a game, that starts the second half, even at quarter breaks, just simply because I think everyone's trying to throw things out there and see what sticks. My one, I think, asterisk for NC State, which is maybe part of the struggle against a team like TCU, is their lack of post play. They just don't have the size that they had a year ago. And I think that could be one of the things that could be the Achilles heel for Westmore and that Wolfpack squad. It'd be interesting to see if they can play faster, get up and down more, and then figure out a way if that can be how they can beat people. The half court game, I just don't know if they've got enough firepower.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to get plenty more chances to prove that, by the way, because when you look ahead, they'll have Ole Miss in that ACC-SEC thing. The entire ACC is the entire ACC. They'll have plenty of teams and challenges. I'll be happy to see them when they come out to the Bay Area because that's a conference game now in early January.
All 18 of them, all 18 teams in the ACC. You get all sorts of fun out there. All right, when we come back, we're going West Coast. We got to talk about what's going on out there. And also, I want to ask Alex about some of the things going on in that Golden State camp as they are thinking about the 2025 WNBA season. But first, a message from our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, could have been halftime, Bills, Chiefs yesterday, I don't know, it's on you. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hi, everybody. Missy Heidrick, and welcome back to Locked On Women's Basketball. Alex Simon is here with me. We are talking about these first few weeks of the college basketball season. So many question marks, a few answers, and I feel like things are maybe a little topsy-turvy and crazy out on the West Coast. Alex, let's talk a little bit first, as we just were before we went to break. The ACC looks different. 18 teams, and 2 of those new ACC teams are in your neck of the woods, in Stanford and Cal. Stanford jumped into the AP Top 25 last week. They go on the road. They drop a game at Indiana. This is a new era, a new time for Stanford women's basketball. Your thoughts on what you're seeing from the Cardinal early here in this season?
Can I copy the exact thing you just said about NC State and paste it over here in the Stanford talk? Everybody just rewind, listen to NC State. But they are a team that absolutely looks like they're missing Kiki Iriafen, who transferred to USC. And everything about this team otherwise has looked like it could be a really solid fit. I mean, they shot the lights out in their first 3 games, which is why I had them ranked pretty highly. And I think other people got excited about them is the fact that they were shooting threes like crazy under new head coach Kate Pay. The 2 games this week, I don't want to disclude the fact that UC Davis gave them a whole lot of trouble when they were still out here in Stanford for a game before they went to Indiana and lost. And the Indiana game just looks like they don't have the size to defend at times if any team has a chance to play in the post. And defense is going to be a huge question with how kind of size challenged they can be. Nunu Aguera is a very solid post player, but she would be more of an undersized forward, and she's having to play a lot of the 5. So we'll see how that looks for them. Cal hasn't really played all that challenging of a schedule, but they are undefeated. And even in the ACC, a lot of the teams have gone out and played difficult schedules. So even just getting through unscathed is noteworthy. There's only out of all of those 18 teams, Missy, only 5 of them still don't have a loss yet. So it is noteworthy in that regard that they've gone through. But we'll see. I think, though, the West Coast is kind of a little unoriented relative to what I think a lot of people thought, just because of how far everybody split and what that's meant for scheduling. I mean, it was really weird that on the 4th day of the season, Washington State was playing at Stanford in a game. It kind of just broke my brain a little bit personally.
Yeah. And it was non-conference. It's not, that's a game you were used to seeing in February, but instead you're watching it in November, and there's no Pac-12 patches on anybody's jersey.
And, Oregon State just played a game at Arizona State as part of a little weekend thing. There'll be other non-conference matchups between, Washington State will play Oregon. But I think that's kind of shook up everybody a little bit. Teams are trying to maybe be a little more conservative with their travel expectations on their schedule and want to stay close to home if they can, because they know for a lot of these West Coast teams, it's a ton of flights back and forth during the season, which helps, though, if other teams are willing to come to Los Angeles, if you're some of those Big Ten teams.
Yeah, well, and let's talk about the Big Ten, because 4 West Coast teams go into the Big Ten in UCLA, USC, Washington, and Oregon. I think let's talk about Oregon first, because I think that my interest to them when I looked at their schedule at the beginning of the season was they did that. They were not going to really go far from Eugene unless they had to, because of what travel is going to be like moving forward. They head to 2 games. They will be headed to Hawaii. They'll play 2 games out there. But this just kind of feels like the Deja Kelly show right now. And it's always been the question mark with the Ducks. People come in, people come out. I don't know if it's going to be stable enough to sustain in the Big Ten this season, especially with how tough UCLA and USC are.
Well, but they also have what I think is probably the best win out of that quartet so far this year. You could argue, both USC and UCLA had, I think, pretty solid wins in Paris on the first day of the year. But to bring Baylor into your house, a Baylor team that we all thought might even be Elite 8 or Final 4 possible worthy, and they ran them out of the gym for most of that game. Now, Baylor came back, made it really tight at the end. But to kind of take that team that we thought was really good in Baylor, host them, and Deja went off for 20 points. Granted, not the most efficient day, but the bigger thing, I think, for Deja, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, 9 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals. If she's going to be active on the defensive end, 7 of those 9 rebounds were defensive. I think that's the best sign possible for Kelly Graves about what this team's going to be. And we'll have to see. It's definitely a new thing. Obviously, she had a very solid career at North Carolina. This is the 5th year for her. You've got to make it work as best as you can. So I'm curious about them. But, right now, especially both for, I think, all of college basketball, the whole, if you're a women's college basketball fan, just head to LA this weekend. We've teased it enough now. Saturday, Notre Dame at USC. Sunday, South Carolina at UCLA. We're basically getting out of those top 7 or 8 teams, we're getting 4 of them facing each other in a weekend. I am pumped for next weekend, Missy.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fantastic. Let's talk about USC. Juju Watkins, she becomes 1,000-point scorer just in the first couple games of her sophomore season, which seems somewhat insane. The transfer portal was good to both USC and to UCLA. I think finding pieces of the puzzle that they were looking for. I think for USC, I felt like Lindsay Gottlieb understood she's got to surround Juju maybe with more pieces, more options. You do that with a Kiki Iriafen and the others. Talk to me about USC, kind of what you've seen early, and then what this weekend matchup, maybe what we get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, Talia von Oelhoffen is just kind of there. It's just like, a luxury item, if you will, so far. She hasn't really been scoring much, but has been distributing the ball well. Look, USC, I think we've seen Juju maybe take a slight step back so far and let Kiki Iriafen especially get established inside in the post. Juju's averaging 21.5, Kiki's at 17.3. But the talent that Juju is, it's going to the world is going to revolve around her in Los Angeles and at USC. And nobody is saying that. I watched her put up 51 in a game in person. Everybody that has watched her play, you understand that you do it. So it's just learning how to do that and the right way to manage the personnel around. They still have Rhea Marshall, who is a great kind of post presence. I mean, this team looks like, you never want to guarantee anything, right? But I can't fathom a world in which this team's not in the Elite 8 competing for a Final Four spot at the end of the season. And frankly, this team is a little more, I think, clear, but it's trying to get players to buy into roles like Kiki, like Van Olhoffen, that are very different than what they used to have. Whereas you go across the town to Westwood and UCLA, this is a team that was missing their true top player out of Charisma Osborne. Now they had some immense talent. Kiki Rice hasn't played because she's been banged up, but Lauren Betts knew what she was doing. They brought in Tamia Gardner. This is a team that I think had a little more openness to kind of learn the full roster rather than, well, we know Juju's good, so let's figure out how you fit around her. Whereas this team in UCLA has a lot more kind of openness. And I think that helps. Janiyah Barker has been able to have some really solid games so far without needing the scoring push. We're going to get to learn a lot, though, about all four of those teams, including South Carolina, from these matchups. And that's what I think we're all looking forward to really well.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I'm really curious to see Notre Dame in that environment as well. I mean, I think that, it's the showcase scenario, but to be able to put two top, 5/6 teams in that environment is going to be in both matchups for UCLA and South Carolina, but the USC Notre Dame. I'm curious to see Notre Dame without Westfeld and what that they can do and how they figure out a way to attack USC. I think that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, well, the other thing with Notre Dame too, though, that really has stood out to some of us that kind of keep an eye, for as much as they have three just monster guards in Hidalgo, Miles, and I mean, Sonia Citrone has to be the best. She might even be better than the third guard on some WNBA teams. If we're being honest.
I think she's the most complete. I've always said I think she's the most complete player in the ACC. I mean,
but the thing that really is interesting to me that Neil Ivy's doing is she has 6 players averaging 30 minutes a game. Yeah. For as much as this team is one of the best talent and most talented starting fives in the country, and then 6 when you add a 6th player, they've got basically a 7-player rotation at most, with 5 at 30 minutes a game, a 6 and Lauren King at 27 a game, and then another at 20. They're going to really put themselves in an interesting spot, I think, long-term, if this is the depth or lack thereof that they're utilizing. So yeah. I'm curious how that works when you have a maybe a tougher matchup and one that's going to maybe put you in a little more foul trouble and force you into your bench. I'm surprised they really haven't done that up until this point against a pretty soft opening schedule. And that's going to make for, a very interesting slate. Because, oh, by the way, as soon as they play USC and that's done, they have the tournament where they play TCU and Utah, and then they play Texas in an ACC SEC crossover. And, oh, by the way, after that, Yukon too. So they are going to quickly have the schedule ramp up, and they're going to get to have a different level of competition that we will get to learn a lot about.
No, I think it'll be interesting to listen to and watch the whistle on over the weekend in that game, because like you said, if foul trouble becomes part of the equation for Notre Dame, then that does change things tremendously. All right, my friend, let's see, it is currently just about 11 o'clock my time here in the Central Time Zone. You're out on the West Coast. The AP poll is going to drop here shortly for everybody. Tell me where you think the biggest surprise is going to be when everybody sees this AP poll today on Monday the 18th.
Well, I don't know, because there's 31 of us, so everybody's got a different thought than I do. I will say I am going to be very fascinated by how people evaluate LSU, because for me, they have been the hardest team to figure out for the last 3 years running, because everything about what I look at when I evaluate a team and how I view them, LSU just breaks the absolute mold. They don't really have all that challenging of a non-conference schedule. So far this year, they have played just 4 mid-majors. They really don't have anybody until they get to the SEC, ACC crossover, because Washington, even as decent as they've been in the tournament, we'll see what happens in their Thanksgiving tournament. But this is a team that we still have to learn a lot about, but we know is really talented. And so what are we learning about them? How do people view the combination of Anisha Morrow, Flau'jae Johnson, Michaela Williams? There is a lot about this team that we know is talented, but I don't know what to think of them so far. So let's see what everybody else does. I have them probably lower than a lot of people will, but I kind of want to just see what everybody else ends up with as we watch them get ready for SEC play against a pretty light non-conference schedule for the 3rd straight year in a row.
Yeah. It's kind of like that asterisk that sits there. Okay, so then here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a sticky note on that one, like a big pin. And then come January, when we have this conversation again, then we're going to talk all about LSU and see where they are within this national landscape, because we know there's always going to be some surprises, whether it's from them or some others, because there's somebody's going to come up and surprise all of us, I think, over the next few weeks. Before I let you go, I have to ask you, there was news out of the WNBA. The lottery happened over the weekend. The first expansion team into the league since 2008, the Golden State organization and franchise. They are going to have the 5th pick in the draft. What do you hear out of there? What's the excitement level? They're headed towards an expansion draft, I think, next month, correct?
Yeah, and I think that's the main key. Is a lot of what Golden State's been getting ready for is just stuff that they couldn't know. You didn't know who had what pick out of this top 4 because of what that will mean. And now, we're not supposedly getting public protection lists. I don't know where the status is on those, but I'm sure Golden State's now working off of who is available, who isn't, and starting to negotiate with all 12 of these other teams about the expansion draft coming up and figuring out who do you want to take, where do you want to take them, what things are teams maybe willing to trade to make sure you leave this player off of the expansion draft list, or make sure that you take this player off of our hands because we don't like her contract and want to get out from under it. All things are part of those negotiations, and I am fascinated to see what happens between now and that expansion draft, because there's going to be a lot of chit chat here, and I can't wait to find out what comes from it.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting and never a dull moment. That is for sure. All right, my friend, I appreciate you. Where does everybody find you on a daily basis?
You can find me anywhere on social media at Alex Simon Sports. That's at all of the new ones and the old ones and wherever you want to follow that. And also read us at sfgate.com.
Fabulous. Well, I appreciate you on this fine Monday morning. It's raining in Kansas City. Sun is out on the West Coast, no matter if your team won or lost over the weekend. That's the beauty of it, folks. We get back up on a Monday. Thank you for joining us here on Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm Missy Heidrick. You can follow me at Missy Heidrick. Follow this podcast at Locked On WBB, and then get over to thenexthoops.com and see all of our amazing colleagues. We've got you covered top to bottom, 365, 24/7. And also, remember, your favorite podcast now has a newsletter, introducing the Locked On NBA Daily Newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On NBA newsletter. Thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic week. Come back and see us. There's great games. You will not be disappointed.